The seventh entry in our continuing series called The Great Movies is John G. Avildsen's Oscar-winning Rocky. And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your, hopefully, happy hump day here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So here at Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind, we are equal opportunity. We are a very inclusive podcast. It's not what you think. I have joked about the fact that Sylvester Stallone, out of the 22 guilty pleasure movies that I have discussed, 6 of them are films starring, sometimes written by, sometimes directed by, Sylvester Enzio Stallone. But I want to show that Sylvester Stallone, as if you didn't know, is capable of more than disposable action films such as Predator or Tango and Cash or Daylight. He is capable and has shown the capability for cinematic greatness. Not just guilty pleasure, not just a fun action film, super entertaining, but top level, legendary, all-time cinema. So yesterday, good old yesterday, as Steve McQueen says in the 1958 version of The Blob, yesterday I talked about ultimate guilty pleasure movie in 1994's The Specialist. Well, we're going to rewind the clock 18 years before The Specialist, when Sylvester Stallone's Rocky opened in theaters. I think it came out in November, kind of a Thanksgiving, because the movie has a Thanksgiving theme. But Rocky, directed by John G. Avildsen, written by and starring Sylvester Stallone, is the 7th entry in our also continuing series simply called The Great Movies. And the original Rocky is a great movie, winning Best Picture 1976 and being nominated for 10 Academy Awards in all, an enormous runaway box office hit, and a film that history can look back on and say a shit ton of movies only existed because of the success of this film, because of what Stallone, who was not really a struggling actor, there was a kind of mythology that Stallone his career was nowhere. I mean, yeah, he had some financial hardships, but he was working, and he was at least somewhat known within the business. He had a brief role in Woody Allen's Bananas. He had a bigger supporting role in the previous year's Farewell, My Lovely. That's a Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe adaptation starring the late, great Robert Mitchum. So he had worked. And as Quentin Tarantino pointed out in the Stallone documentary simply titled Sly that came out last year, Stallone was terrific in the movie The Lords of Flatbush with his BFF, Henry Winkler, and Perry King, among others. So Stallone was a working actor, struggling financially, but he was not a complete unknown. When he happened to, on an October night, was it October? No, I think it was actually March 1975, he tuned in to see the world heavyweight champion, undisputed, 33 at the time. He was kind of past it, but still vibrant and an electric force in the ring. Muhammad Ali take on a club fighter. He was a tough guy. I don't want to use the phrase tomato can. This is not the ham and egger that the character of Rocky Balboa sees himself as, but Chuck Wepner was a fringe contender. He'd gotten in there with the former heavyweight champ, the guy that a young Muhammad Ali, still Cassius Clay, had taken the title from Sonny Liston. Chuck Wepner bled so much in the Liston fight, they had to stop the fight. There's an unbelievable picture. He's like literally bleeding all over Sonny Liston. Chuck Wepner, the Bayonne bleeder, a guy who wasn't afraid of the sight of his own blood, wasn't afraid during a fight if his nose got broken. Just push it back into place. No problem. So Chuck Wepner almost went the distance with Ali. It's not a very good fight. I mean, it's over on YouTube and in high definition. It's not a good fight. Chuck Wepner kept throwing rabbit punches. He's hitting Ali behind the head. He was doing all kinds of dirty stuff. And then Ali started throwing rabbit punches. The guys were almost working together to try to entertain the crowd, although they weren't. But Chuck was trying to knock the guy's head off. He was trying to win the championship. And the joke goes that Wepner, before the fight, said something to his wife, the effect of, "You're going to be sleeping with the world heavyweight champion tonight, the new world heavyweight champ." And then after the fight was over, she supposedly said, "Sweetie, do you know what room Ali is staying in?" Like she was going to go over there because he won, he was the champ. But Sylvester Stallone, always a creative type, always somebody whose mind was working a million miles a minute. Although Wepner he was still on his feet, he didn't make it to the final bell. The ref had to stop the fight. He was just getting smashed. There was a heavy knockdown in the 15th round, and similar to what we saw in the movie Rocky and in Rocky 2 and Rocky 3 and Rocky 4, Chuck Wepner in the 15th round goes down and he's kind of grabbing at the ropes like he had an idea where he was. The guy was fucking exhausted. He's chasing us. The thing with Ali, even when he didn't necessarily look to be in the best of condition, his cardio was off the charts. It was something about him that marked him as different than any other fighter, especially as a heavyweight. The guy never looked gassed. He should have looked exhausted in the 15th round, and he really didn't. He knew how to kind of conserve and use his weight to lean on his opponents and do all kinds of tricks within the ring to kind of counteract the rabbit punches of Wepner. But Stallone was inspired by the fact that this guy, who was not given a real chance to win the fight, he was kind of cannon fodder, because Ali had his previous fight, he had won the title from George Foreman, and they wanted him to stay champion for as long as possible because he was box office. The public sentiment, which had been against him only a couple of years earlier, after what happened in Zaire, and the way that the Supreme Court took his side after he had his conviction overturned from the Vietnam era and all of these things, he was beginning to become a beloved figure by this point. And so he got a couple of boos that night, but generally speaking, people wanted to see a good show. They hoped that Wepner could give the audience a thrill. And in the 9th round, and this is something to a certain extent that Stallone used in his Rocky screenplay, Wepner's just getting the shit kicked out of him in this fight. Ali is he's toying with him. He's doing what we see in the movie, Apollo Creed sticking his paw in his face, keeping distance, making faces, screwing around. Now, in the world of the movie Rocky, Apollo Creed is dominating the first round. He's just fucking around. He's landing bombs on Balboa, and then he gets careless, and Rocky lands a haymaker and puts him down. And if we're being fair, he should have knocked him out in the first round because Apollo's down for about 15 to 20 seconds. Now, in the actual fight that inspired the movie Rocky, in the 9th round, I don't think that Ali even came close to losing any of the first 8 rounds. There's a moment where Chuck Wepner, Ali is relatively close to the ropes, and Wepner steps on Ali's foot. He didn't do it on purpose, but there's a picture very clearly showing Ali starting to go down, and he's on his foot. So if you're watching on TV or if you were in the arena, you don't know what it is. It's similar to 1996, the first fight between Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. And those of you who are big fight fans know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a moment in, I believe, the 6th round. It was either the 5th or the 6th. But Tyson seemed to be turning the fight in his favor. And then very late in the round, it may have been seconds before the end of the round, Tyson goes down. The arena goes berserk. And the announcer starts shouting. Ferdy Pacheco, who had been Ali's doctor in the ring against Wepner, Pacheco 20 plus years earlier is in the corner of Ali. He was Ali's doctor. But in the Tyson-Holyfield fight, The place is going crazy because Tyson appears to, maybe he got squared up, maybe the fight's going to be over. Tyson goes flying, he gets right up, and then when they watch the replay, they say, he was off balance. Guy hit him in the chest. It wasn't a punch that under any other circumstances would knock someone down. So in the Ali-Wepner fight, Wepner landed something, but Ali went down. And if you watch it, if you don't know, he went down like he'd been shot. He tripped. I mean, we've all tripped and we've gone down hard. So joke was, and if you want to say is, when Chuck went back to his corner people didn't see what happened. But they were excited. They're cheering, whatever. Chuck, what did you hit him with? I think I stepped on his foot and then I landed a punch. I don't think I hit him that hard. But either way, they're celebrating. And then somebody in the corner looks across the ring and he said, oh, shit. And Wepner goes, what? He said, well, I'm looking at him over there and now he looks mad. Of course he looks mad. He was embarrassed because that was scored as a knockdown. And in the too many fights, but in the 61 fight career of Muhammad Ali, and bear in mind, his prime was 64 to 67. He didn't lose any fights when he was at his best. He lost two tough fights, Frazier in 71 and Kenny Norton, who broke his jaw in 73. But both fights were up for grabs. They were very, very tightly contested. He lost, but he only had two losses. At one point, he was 55-2. His record ended up 56-5 because he was fighting way past when he should have been fighting. But in his career, he was knocked down 3 times. 3 times. 3 legitimate knockdowns. Henry Cooper, 63. Sonny Banks in 62. Joe Frazier in 71. And if you want to count Wepner stepping on his foot, that's the other time. But he was somebody who really didn't take knockdowns. And look, Tyson Fury, tremendous fighter, right? Tyson Fury is a guy who's been knocked down a bunch of times. Even the great Evander Holyfield has taken his share or took his share of knockdowns. Nobody likes getting knocked down, especially in a situation where you know exactly what's going on. You say, this is fucking bullshit. Even Marvin Hagler, there was a balance shot, the Juan Roldan fight. I think that's the only time Hagler ever went down. It wasn't really a knockdown. He got tripped. But hey, it was officially scored a knockdown. So Sylvester Stallone wrote what became Rocky after seeing the Ali-Wepner fight. And early drafts of Rocky, the movie, the screenplay, were a little darker. Rocky was a less kind, less hopeful, less uplifting sort of character. There was, I presume, because I haven't read it, just so you know, I haven't read the original draft. But there was a greater emphasis on the fact that he was the strong arm, and maybe he wasn't so nice when it unfortunately came time to break somebody's thumbs or whatever it was that Gatso wanted him to do. But as the process went along, and I think that Henry Winkler may have, in a documentary, talked about this, that he talked to Sly, and he wasn't the only one that said, hey, this is fantastic, bro. This is amazing. Maybe if you make the character of Rocky Balboa a little bit nicer, a little bit more relatable, well, he did it, to his credit. And this is something that all creative types deal with, where you do something and you think that it's exactly what you want to do, but you get feedback saying you might have a better chance at commercial success. You might have a better chance to sell this, get this project set up somewhere, if you soften the main character. Because everything is great, but maybe we need a more rootable protagonist here. And Rocky, the character being named Rocky, it could be Rocky Graziano, the famous fighter from the 40s into the 50s. It could be Rocky Marciano. I always assumed that it was a bit of a tribute to Marciano, who had died not that long before Rocky came out. Marciano, unfortunately, retired pretty young, undefeated, 49-0. He died in a plane crash in the late 60s, which is very unfortunate. Maybe it was 1970 now that I'm thinking about it, but it was recent history. Rocky Marciano was a recent iconic historical figure. I think it's more likely that he used that name in tribute to Marciano, who was also a heavyweight, as is Rocky Balboa. So Stallone did not want to simply sell his script, even for what for the time would be a shit ton of money, because he was offered a lot of money, I think a couple of $100,000, but he wasn't going to have the opportunity even to screen test to play Rocky Balboa. He wanted to star in the film. And unfortunately, he and Irwin Winkler, no relation to Henry, have had a major falling out, more on Stallone's side. Irwin Winkler is in his 90s. I don't think that he was ever contentious towards Stallone, but the issue was that the way that Sly, the original deal, he doesn't own a piece, as much as he's made an unbelievable amount of money from the Rocky saga. He doesn't own any of it. And that was the issue where Stallone was seeing them as kind of trying to squeeze blood from a stone. When he heard they were going to make like a Drago standalone film, I think he hit the ceiling. He thought it was just horrendous. But he made sure to contact his friend, for real, Dolph Lundgren, to say, Dolph, my issue is not with you, pal. You know that. And Lundgren says, no. I know you, Sly. Come on. How many years have we known each other? I know that's not why you're upset. Don't worry about it. But he didn't want someone else. He identified so strongly, Sly in real life, a young guy already into fitness, looked the part of a young fighter. Much as a couple of years later, in what is generally regarded as the best boxing film, even ahead of Rocky, different angle, Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull, but Bobby D, Mr. De Niro, looked the part of middleweight champion Jake LaMotta. De Niro, they say, actually could have been a professional fighter. Nobody ever said that about Stallone. Stallone looked the part and looked great in the ring, throwing bombs and dodging and the footwork. But De Niro, they said, could have actually been a middleweight contender. And 15 years after that, when Daniel Day-Lewis, who was acknowledged kind of as the GOAT, greatest actor of his generation, I mean, he's basically Olivier. But Daniel Day-Lewis trained for Jim Sheridan's movie simply titled The Boxer, and a former featherweight champ, great fighter, Barry McGuigan said, Day-Lewis, in a different version of life, he could have been like a top 5 middleweight. That's how good this guy is in the ring. I've never seen it work with a lot. He didn't name any names. I've worked with a lot of actors. Day-Lewis, is there anything this guy isn't good at? And they're still friends to this day. But Stallone took way less money knowing that he could play the lead. And these are the kinds of things that Hollywood types, whether they're money people or whether they're people who are going to approach the major studios for funding, these are the things that you weigh. Is it worth paying less and I have to give this guy and let him play this role when another actor might be bigger for the box office? You just don't know. And so much of Hollywood is a crapshoot. And this is where the famous William Goldman quote, nobody knows anything. It's where it comes into play. Because there were people, I guarantee you, if social media existed in 1975 era, who would have said, what the fuck are they doing? This is supposedly an incredible script. And you're going to give it to the guy who had a small role in The Lords of Flatbush and played a thug in Farewell, My Lovely? This isn't going to work. They should have gone with whoever was the flavor of the day. They should have gone with Bronson. Who knows what they would have said? Dustin Hoffman, Redford. Thank goodness they went with Sylvester Stallone, and he was able to play the role. And then the Apollo Creed character was clearly modeled on Ali, and that's why at the Oscars in 77, I think it was actually at the 78 Oscars, but when Stallone was on stage giving the award for I think he was giving the award for Best Actor at that point. It could have been Best Actress. Sly did a bunch of, they let him do a bunch of stuff. But the real Ali came on stage and he and Stallone shadowbox. It's like a top 10 greatest Oscars moment. And Ali even says, I am the real Apollo Creed. And that's why they start shadowboxing. You know, like the champ was just fucking around with him and the guys embraced him. It really an incredible moment at the Oscars. There's so much of Hollywood glad-handing and inside jokes and stuff, but that's a moment that anybody can appreciate because those two guys really adored one another. But Stallone, they had to cast Apollo Creed, and there was talk that Ali might play the role, and then they discussed Ernie Shavers. At a certain point, his name was brought up, and I know his name was brought up for Rocky III, and there was an idea maybe could we go with Joe Frazier. But they settled on another guy who was not a boxer and never could have been a professional football player in Carl Weathers, who had briefly played for the Raiders and certainly had the build for it. But he looked great with boxing gloves on and moving around the ring as Sylvester Stallone. The believability is important. They don't have to be boxers, but they have to look like they could be boxers. And casting Carl Weathers is the next most important thing after the script, because Weathers is so incredible. I mean, he could have gotten a supporting actor nomination. He's in so much of the movie, it could almost be a lead role. I like when you have supporting performers, whether actress or actor, that have huge roles that are not just, as much as I love, Dame Judi Dench, Shakespeare in Love, she's terrific. She's in the movie for 6 minutes, maybe 7. She won supporting actress. I love how big Carl's role is as Apollo Creed, and I like the fact that as the series continued, his character became more and more interesting. It was just home run casting. Now, there are certain apocryphal stories about Rocky, and as I mentioned, one of the apocryphal stories is that Stallone was basically a complete unknown, which he wasn't. Another apocryphal story, which could be true, is that there was a preview screening. I don't think it was a test screening. I think it was simply a preview screening just before the original Rocky was going to come out. And this was in the Sly documentary. Again, I always say, if I say something, you can check my work. I don't want you to think that I'm just pontificating and I don't have any kind of, trivia or any idea in my head what I'm saying, that I'm just making it up. I might be going off the cuff, but I'm not making it up. But in the Sly documentary, Sylvester Stallone tells a story about he and his brother, Frank, who is still around. In fact, Sly helped Frank celebrate his birthday not that long ago. Another thing I love about Sly, he's all over social media, and he really gives us and gave us, especially when he did the recut, the new edit of Rocky IV, he took us behind the scenes. This was during COVID. He didn't know what to do with himself, and he recut Rocky IV, and he made regular fans feel like they were part of the process. He was sharing so much of what he was doing, trying to do, and hope to accomplish with that new cut. I absolutely loved it and appreciated him even more, that he was willing to share so much of the process with fans, because nobody was telling him he had to share it to his Instagram story. But he was excited. He didn't know what else to do with himself during that time. And so he was, with his camera, with his phone, he's telling us, here's what I'm doing with this scene, and here's what I'm doing with that scene, and look at Apollo over here. It was amazing. So Sly and Frank Stallone tell a story of when they went to a preview screening of Rocky in 1976. And according to them, more than half of the people in the theater walked out within the first hour. He said there were some that were there that appeared to enjoy it, but the number of walkouts we had were soul-crushing. We thought, we fucked up. This movie's going to be a bomb. It didn't cost that much money. The budget, and I just checked before starting this episode, the budget was definitely below $5 million. The number that they put up on Wiki, it can't be right. It said it was more like 1 to 2. There's no way it was only 1 to 2. It was a studio feature, it was UA. It was not 1 to 2, but it was a lower budget. This was not a big budget, mid-70s like The Man Who Would Be King or that kind of for a big production, they were able to shoot it relatively cheap. I'm comfortable in saying that. So the film hit theaters and the critical reception was terrific. It was fantastic. This was not a movie that started slowly or underappreciated, and you look back and say, certain critics were calling The Godfather indulgent, while other critics were saying, no, this is the best movie about crime ever made. But Rocky got very, very good reviews, and it was a hit immediately. It grossed over $100 million in the United States. And for the time, $100 million would be fantastic now with the budget that I just mentioned. If it grossed more than 10 times its production cost, including marketing, that's unbelievable. But it was a box office hit. This is not an underappreciated film that was later rediscovered. This is a movie that when it landed, people saw it, people loved it, and people told their friends, you must see this movie. And just like when we think of certain action movies of the 90s, and even today you'll see it occasionally, when people describe it as Die Hard on because Die Hard, 1988, is a movie that changed the way that Hollywood made action films. And you started making movies where you had a lone hero, usually a guy, trapped in a confined space with terrorists or something in that range of terrorism. And how is he going to save the day? Stallone did it in Cliffhanger. Steven Seagal and Kurt Russell did it in Executive Decision. Wesley Snipes did it in Passenger 57. Sean Astin and Louis Gossett Jr. did it in Toy Soldiers. Die Hard Anna, Die Hard Inna. Die Hard at a prep school. Die Hard in a hockey arena. Sudden Death. Van Damme, Stallone's buddy. Bruce Willis's buddy. Rocky, though, it's the prototype, not even a stereotype, the prototype for a certain kind of movie, often a sports film, but it doesn't have to be, where you have an underdog, a motivating type of a figure, an underdog who triumphs over insurmountable obstacles. Rudy, a true story, the true story of Rudy Rudiger, the walk-on at Notre Dame who ends up actually playing. That is a Rocky movie. Hoosiers, same director, David Anspaugh. Gene Hackman, one of his most famous performances. Dennis Hopper, don't you fucking look at me! Same year as Blue Velvet. Hoosiers is Rocky, only it's a high school basketball team. You understand what I'm saying? Hell, Rounders with Matt Damon. It's a Rocky story, only they're playing poker. Rocky became a brand name. And all because of Sylvester Stallone. The creativity, the motivation, the drive that he had to do more than play bit parts in movies. The sense that he was meant for something greater. Just as Rocky Balboa, a guy who had tremendous talent, but he hadn't tapped into it. He hadn't been given the opportunity to show just how great he could be until being given the 1,000,000-to-1 shot. According to the poster, his whole life was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. But until Stallone was given the opportunity to show how talented of a writer he could be, how talented of an actor he was and had in him to be. It all would have been lost to history were it not for, you know what, champ? You can fight Wepner. He's got a great nickname, the Bayonne Bleeder. Yeah, didn't he fight Sonny? That's right, he fought Sonny. Sadly, it was Sonny's last fight, Sonny Liston, that is, before he passed. But Rocky, 1976, an unquestioned giant of cinema. A great movie, a game-changing motion picture, creating a whole subgenre of films that replicated, at least tried to, usually don't succeed. Films, some of the movies I mentioned do succeed, but they're not Rocky. And it would be hard-pressed for anyone to create two franchises. Stallone created Rocky and then Rambo. Despite all of the terrible movies, despite the number of admitted guilty pleasure movies, Sylvester Stallone, in a land of other enormous talents, Hollywood, as crazy as it is, Stallone is still more or less in a class by himself. Rocky, 1976, directed by John G. Avildsen, written by and starring Sylvester Stallone. The seventh entry in our continuing series of the great movies. This has been episode 292 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.